Whenever you hear anybody talk about Hanukah, like on the TV, and they say, what's Hanukah? They tell about this legend that's in the Talmud, that when the Jews came to the temple and they rededicated it, they found a cruse of oil. Y'all know the story. It should have lasted one day. It lasted 8 days until a rider came back with more oil. Now, that is not what should be talked about for Hanukkah. The only reason that story is in the Talmud is because the rabbis were fearful of the Romans. They were pacifists at that point. In the year 70 CE, the Romans destroyed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And in 132 to 135, there was another failed rebellion against Rome, led by Bar Kokhba, backed by Rabbi Akiva. And so the rabbis were, at that point, pacifists. They were scared. And so instead of telling the true story of Hanukkah, they put this legend in there. And that's, for 2,000 years, the Jews studied the Talmud, and when they came across the Hanukkah passage, that's what they learned, and so that's why it's known. But that's not the main message, and that's not the key to Hanukkah. What's the key to Hanukkah? That you go back to the time when Alexander the Great conquered the area in 333, and then he died in 323 BCE, and then the Greeks split. Half were in control in Syria. That was the Seleucids, and then you had the Egyptian Greeks and the Ptolemies. They fought back and forth. And then 167, Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the Syrian Greeks were in control. And they wanted to make sure that the Jews weren't going to cause any trouble. And so they asked the high priest, who was a political appointee, what they should do. His advice was that they should forbid Jewish practice, circumcision, kosher, Torah study. So that's what he did. And Mattathias and his 5 sons, led by Judah the Maccabee, his son, they rose up in rebellion. And they were successful, and they pushed back the Syrian Greeks for 100 years, and they had control over Israel for only the second time in Jewish history. And so what is the story of Hanukkah? The story of Hanukkah is the story of Zionism, of the historic right of the Jewish people to that land, and of political and religious sovereignty. That's what should be talked about. And you think about America. What holiday in the whole history of America, in the whole year, talks about the essence of America better than Hanukkah? None. July 4th, maybe. But Hanukkah is about political and religious freedom, which is the story of America. Now, why is Hanukkah 8 days? It's nothing to do with that miracle story. That came after the fact. The book of Maccabees, which is in the Apocrypha, tells us that when the Maccabees got to the temple, they rededicated it, they had the temple again. So you know what they did? They took lulav branches and they marched around for 8 days, and they recited Hallel, Psalms. In other words, they were celebrating Sukkot again because they couldn't 2 months before when the temple was desecrated. And I have a video on this called the Sukkot-Hanukkah Connection. That's what the book of Maccabees says. And in the prayer book, Al Hanisim, the prayer is all about how God helped us get victory from the few over the mighty, the Greeks. That's what Hanukkah is about. It's about political and religious freedom. So when someone says to you, what is Hanukkah? You say, it's the story of brave, independent Jews who threw off the yoke of Greek oppression, who had forbidden them to practice Judaism, and they regained sovereignty over the land God promised them thousands of years before. That's what Hanukkah is about. It's about Zionism, and it's the essence of America, of political and religious freedom. That is what Hanukkah is about. And the reason why we teach this miracle story is because of fear and pacifism and a 2,000-year-old problem about worrying what the Romans were going to think. Well, who cares what the Romans think today? That's not the essence of Hanukkah. And it belittles this very important political, philosophical, religious holiday, which is dedicated to the most important principles of America and of the state of Israel, which is Zionism, which is the idea that we have a right to live freely and independently. And that is the Messianic vision. When the Bible talks about the Messiah, it says that every man will sit under his own vine and fig tree, and no one will make him afraid. Maimonides says it'll be a time when we can study and live Jewishly the way we want. That is what is hoped for. And that's what Hanukkah epitomizes. And that's why it's such an important message, and why we should not be emphasizing the miracle story. We should be emphasizing the fact that the Maccabees attained political and religious freedom in the land of Israel.